What's up, squad? It's your Squid here at Anxious Squid Productions. This video is another one from my often neglected history playlist, so if you're expecting a reaction video, I expect you'll be surprised, but sit tight because I think you'll find this interesting anyway. As usual, the video is brought to you by me and my patrons, that's them just there. In case you didn't know though, Patreon is a platform where you can provide content creators a monthly payment as a means of supporting or thanking them for the entertainment that they provide you with. My Patreon members helped me pay my rent this month, so I cannot accurately express to you how much I appreciate the concept. Add your name to this list and get your hands on a holographic squid sticker while stocks last, as well as access to the scripts for these history videos, weekly music reaction live streams starting halfway through this week, and other cool stuff as I think of it. Click the link in the description below and join the squad for as little as $1 per month on the Cuttlefish tier. It's literally that easy. Patreon's not why you click this video though, is it? So let's stop dilly-dallying around it and I'll dive into the history, shall I? A big shout out goes to Mike McFate at the California Sun and Nicole Dahlberg at the California Sea Museum for writing about this topic in various parts of 2018 respectively. I lent heavily on their articles while writing the script for this video, and you should check them out if you consume your media in that fashion. The links are in the description. Now all of that's out of the way though, let's actually get into the history. In the early days of Gold Rush California, which was an era that lasted from 1848 to 1855, in case you were unaware, murder and mayhem were almost the expected order of the day. For a portion of that time, perhaps no class of rogue men spread so much terror across the area of San Francisco as the Australian ex-convicts that landed there. And yes, I will be calling them Australian throughout this video, despite the fact that Australia technically hadn't federated and wouldn't become a country until 1901, some 50 odd years later. Australian rolls off the tongue much quicker and easier than ex-British convicts who had been sent to New Holland to complete their prison sentences and then chose to go elsewhere once it was complete. You know what I'm saying? The facts are that most of them were actually of Irish descent, but for the purpose of this video, they were Australian, alright? Alright. Between April of 1849 and May of 1850, some 11,000 ex-Australian convicts crossed the Pacific after the completion of their prison sentences, presumably to try their luck in the goldfields of America. Of those 11,000, at least 7,500 were from Sydney. There were many who gained honest employment, worked hard and raised families. Perhaps even the majority of them did. The Australians that prospered in the Californian goldfields often sent for their wives and children once they'd struck gold, and they prospered and became permanent Californians. Let me know if that's the case for your family tree. I think that would be interesting. Others who were not as successful in the fields would sometimes return to Australia, which had begun to experience its own gold rush from around 1851. Historical records show that this pattern continued for some time, with people travelling back and forth between the two countries in search of gold. Over 200 vessels sailed from Australia to California during the 1849 to 1851 period, carrying not only passengers but also prospecting and food supplies. The transport of these goods and the prolific movement of people facilitated high trade between the two nations during the Golden Rush years. While many folk clearly had prospecting and prosperity in mind, it's without doubt that at the very least some others had arrived with thievery in San Francisco specifically in their minds. Ex-convicts from the British penal colonies in Australia formed a gang in San Francisco known as the Sydney Coves. Cove being prison slang at the time for fellow or chap. And they would also later be known as the Sydney Ducks, which is why I'm wearing this jersey. As Capone later ruled Chicago, the Coves dominated the underworld of mid-19th century San Francisco at a time when the city swarmed with rough men chasing fast riches. They were the top of the food chain. And I think their infamy deserves to be remembered. Their base of operations was the Sydney Valley, or Sydney Town, later known as the Barbary Coast in San Francisco. At the time, it consisted of 3 city blocks of gambling rooms, brothels, and other unsavoury businesses that sprawled from the slope of Telegraph Hill near the waterfront. The gangsters wore cabbage tree hats, carried Bowie knives, and were said to walk with swinging gaits that had been adopted during years in leg irons. Among their ranks were swindlers and thugs with nicknames like Big Brummy, Dutch Charlie, Singing Billy, and the gang's leader, Long Jim Stewart, a tall, curly-haired killer who wielded .44 caliber double-barrel pistols. Anti-foreigner paranoia was on the rise in California at the time, something people in 2020 may see some parallels with to our society, but I digress. As a part of a minority, the Australians experienced a degree of persecution and were certainly easy targets for blame at any rate. Attitudes of nativism began surfacing, making the American-born gold diggers particularly hostile and suspicious of foreigners. The Australians, with their distinct accents and daring nature, were easily identifiable and were regarded as poachers in the Garden of Eden. San Francisco's crusading press at the time seemed to lay every manner of criminality at the feet of the swaggering ex-colonial prisoners in Sydney town, to the point some historians feel their crimes may have been embellished by the press initially in an effort to sway public opinion against them. Even so, their reputation for treachery was eventually well earned and absolutely cannot be disputed today. The gangsters' stocks in trade were highway robbery, murder, arson, particularly arson, a manoeuvre employed to create chaos so that they could loot homes and businesses of the people fighting the fires. They would burn nearby properties to the ones they knew had the best loot, forcing patrons to evacuate or go and assist, and they would scoop up any and all valuables before the fire raged through. Some shopkeepers would relent and actually pay the coves in advance to ensure that their places wouldn't be torched or ransacked in their absence if they were providing aid. In time, San Francisco's business class had had enough. They established a group of people now referred to as respectable vigilantes, which, if you ask me, is a strange way of saying a lynch mob, but again, I digress. The Committee of Vigilance, as it was known, would move swiftly to enact so-called justice, unrestrained by an ineffectual police force, or quibbles of the law, as they put it. During the committee's first week in 1851, they got their first victim, a Sydney cove by the name of John Jenkins. Jenkins was captured after stealing a safe, and he was lynched that very night without due process. Before long, the vigilantes would also spot Sydney Cove's leader, Long Jim Stewart, walking along the road himself one evening. While captured, and in an attempt to save his own skin, the little fucking rat gave up the names of about 24 members of his crew, instantly making outlaws of them all, robbing his mates of their plausible deniability, and putting them all in danger from the Committee of Vigilance. The chase was on. Long Jim Stewart was lynched regardless of the information he had provided, along with at least 3 more Sydney Coves who were only there because they'd been sold out by their so-called leader. Some other members of the gang were sent back to prison in Australia, while many of the rest simply scattered across America when Stewart had been captured in the first place and were not discovered as gang members at any point. All up, the criminal enterprise known as the Sydney Coves, or Sydney Ducks, lasted just 2 years. The legacy of lawlessness in Sydney Valley lingered though. The area became known as the Barbary Coast, an empire of vice that endured for more than half a century. The strip clubs that today dot Broadway in downtown San Francisco are said to owe their lineage to the Australian gangster entrepreneurs that first set their roots there. An enduring legacy for the rebels of yesteryear. And that concludes another history video, guys. As mentioned throughout the video, the gang was known as the Sydney Coves and later the Sydney Ducks, and they were sometimes even referred to as the Australian Desperados. I barely scratched the surface in this video, so if you're interested and you want to do some further Googling, as I said at the start, I think you should start by reading those 2 articles, one by Mike McFate and the other by Nicole Dahlberg, as I said. I've linked them in the description, just click it, it's easy. The pictures I used alongside me throughout the video were all sourced from those articles, or Google, or the public domain. So naturally, I don't own any publishing rights to any of them, and for legal purposes, would like to make the point right now that I am not claiming to. The script was written by Julian Centauri Sr., that's me, and these guys are my patrons. If you like this story from history, please consider becoming a patron. I post the scripts to these videos in my Patreon feed, and you'll have access to a bunch of other perks as well. If this was the first time you stumbled across my channel, thanks so much for watching. Do me a solid, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button while you're here. Give the video, to your mates in Messenger, share it with your mates, tell them about me. But as always, you'll see me when you look at me. I'll see you when I look at you. Thanks for watching.